going live. Saying hi to everybody in the chat room. It's Monday at noon. Here we are. It's Mod City Live, Spring Break Edition. This is how it's going to be for a while, I think. So we're going to try to do these shows every Monday, and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, and our normal shows on Saturday. We've got some cats in the room. Give us a shout in the chat room. Let us know if you're out there. Let us know how you're doing, what you're planning on doing. Here's a cat. Hi. You're a good cat. Is everybody in? Can everybody see us? Can everybody hear us? Let us know if you've got any sound problems, if you've got any life problems, whatever problems you got, feel free to share them with us. We're here in LA. LA is getting interesting. Hey, Neptune. What's up? Thanks for joining us. And yeah. So, hey, just a thought for everybody who's listening. I would recommend that you put together a daily routine to create some normalcy in your life. I've just started mine today. Started doing some at-home yoga. I've never done yoga before, but what better way to wake up? Stretching yourself out, getting things loose, getting things fresh, and then you got your body feeling good for the day. Ed Sweeney, what's up, man? How you doing? Living that work from home life in Seattle. Much love up to the Pacific Northwest from the Pacific Southwest. And greetings to, oh man, I'm going to try to read that name. The Inner Mounting Flam. Is that what it is? Is that Thin Mounting Flam? I can't tell where the threes fit. What's up, you guys? So, yeah, we're going to be doing this every day. Thanks for joining us. We're creating distractions for all of us involved, and here we go. Yeah, there's Victor back there.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
That isn't coming through for some reason. Hold on again. Try it out again.
How are you guys doing?
There it goes. There it goes. All right.
What up, Mogi?
We've got a cat in the middle of the room. The cat wants to play with the stick. Feel free if you want. The Inner Mounting Flame. I like that. That's a great name. Oh yeah, I guess I should have read the threes as E's. I like the Mounting Flam too because I'm a drummer. We like flams, things like that. Mogi's kind of a drummer too. Okay, well, what are we here to talk about today? Let's ask the executive decision maker. I've been meaning to get this on the show for a while. It's a little dusty, but executive decision maker. Should we talk about VCAs and CV mixing? Look, there's like cat hair on it. This is kind of gross, actually. I've had this for probably 32 years. Executive decision maker. Should we talk about VCAs, CV mixing, the things that we kind of planned on talking about? So if we don't get a good answer here, we might be shit out of luck. Possibly. Good enough for me. Okay. So the executive decision maker has spoken. We're going to talk about VCAs, CV mixing. Let's take a moment to consider what we use VCAs for. What is a VCA? Anybody out there? A VCA is a volt. Yeah, exactly. It is a voltage controlled amplifier. one of the three. Maybe we need more than three, but certainly to get some sound control in our patches, we need a VCA to control what amplitude, volume in a loose sense, in the audio signal sense. But VCAs, we often hear the uh, uh, the old standby. You can never have enough VCAs. Hey, Magna, welcome from Norway. Glad to have you in here. And Grant Harris, what's up? Can you actually never have enough? I think we're going to determine today whether we can ever have enough VCAs. But um, if we're not coming from a modular perspective, right? If we're coming from the software world, if we're coming from the world where our synth is already put together for us, in a sense, um, we might have a certain expectation, or maybe just an unawareness of what a VCA does. And in reality, we're using VCAs all the time in software, in hardware. They're almost always present in some form or another. Now, unless we're working with a drone synthesizer, like the Mofenzief Stargazer, which itself has, I think, many VCAs built into it, um, we might we might almost always have a VCA at the end of our signal chain, at the end of our signal flowing out of our tone generators, maybe through our tone shapers, and then to our mixer or our system. That's where we might actually drop maybe our first VCA. And this VCA is the one that often is missed, because that is the VCA that often isn't labeled. We don't see something on most synthesizers that says VCA, at least most fully self-contained synthesizers, right? Are non-modular synthesizers. They often say things like volume, or uh, uh, maybe amp in some cases. They might not say anything about that. We might just see an envelope that's attached to that VCA to open and close the sound while we're working. So, but in a software-based environment, we end up using VCAs almost constantly. If you want to assign an envelope somewhere else, or an LFO to any other thing inside of your patch, volume included, we need to generally, in the software world, assign that VCA to, or assign rather that envelope, or that LFO or sequencer or something like that, to a certain control, right? Let's think of a very simple situation where we have an LFO and we want to assign that to the filter cutoff, for instance. We might drag our LFO up to our filter cutoff knob, or assign it in a matrix or something like this. And then we have to maybe click on that knob and drag, and a little ring will appear around that knob if you're using Massive or Serum, or something like this, pigments. Um, so, what is that ring? That ring is essentially the VCA. It's our amplitude control, the amount, the intensity, the depth, the contour, as they call it on the Moog, of the control of that modulation source on its destination. Okay, so if we assigned an LFO every time, and every time that LFO was going, sending that knob from the top to the bottom, right, all the way 100% one way or the other, uh, we might end up with some really over the top modulation material that might be not as musical as if we could attenuate and dial that range in. So, as we do that, we're effectively controlling the amplitude of the signal of the LFO. So, uh, anytime we're assigning something, and controlling and assigning the amount, the intensity, the amplitude, quite literally, of that modulation source, we're using a VCA. We're putting a VCA between that LFO and its destination, between the envelope and its destination, generally. So we're going to look at that today. I think, let's see here. Tube Tobe illusion, is that right? Toby illusion. I hope I have that right. Tube illusion. No, I can't. I don't know what your name is. I'm sorry. How many VCAs would you suggest for maybe 4 rows of 104 HP? Um, Good question. Hard to say exactly what we should have in that situation. I was using almost no VCAs for a long time. I had low pass gates in the form of the Make Noise Optimix. I had a homemade passive low pass gate VCA that we'll look at in another show, and we'll actually build one maybe together. Um, but these, I think I would at least want like a quad VCA, something that's going to give us the ability to control volume and maybe 3 other things, maybe 3 other volume sources, right? A VCA sometimes could act as a mixer, but uh, anytime we want some control over a signal, this is where we effectively want a VCA somewhere in the middle. The red rind you describe is more like an offset. The red rind. I think the kind you describe is more like an offset. Well, an offset we'll use to it's usually a DC signal, a direct current, something that's held, and as we turn it up or down, it holds at that position. So we're going to look at DC offset because I've got maths over here, which is pretty handy for this type of stuff. Um, but DC offset is different. Okay, the red ring I describe is more like an offset. You mean on our plugins, right? You're referring to if we're working within a synthesizer inside of a VST format or something like this. It could be an offset if we're using a macro, let's say, to control a knob. That would certainly be effectively acting as an offset, right? A macro is not constantly moving like an LFO is, or maybe not constantly moving, but an envelope does its rising and falling whenever triggered. So that's a little bit different than an offset. An offset is just going to reset the value of something to a certain other parameter, and it's going to kind of sit there unless we're automating that thing or unless we are by hand turning that knob. So a macro certainly acts as an offset. LFOs and envelopes, though, those are not really offsets in the sense, or they're sort of constant offsets, I suppose, if you want to think about it that way. Um, Quad VCA from IntelliGel is great. Also works as a mixer. You have 2 of them, then I think you're probably in the right, in a pretty good situation with your 4 rows of 104 HP. But this is where we'll start to see some of those differences. Okay, so maybe let's hop over to our other camera over there. And big shout out again to the chat room, Selectro. I called you Skeletor again almost. Um, Grant, Ed, Neptune, thank you guys for coming in here. Okay, just taking a sip of my coffee before we slide over to the modular. And let me know if you can see the modular okay. I think we are hopefully in a pretty good place here, but okay. We are now, sorry, Cat. We're now in the vicinity of the VCA. Okay, now just to clarify, we're using the mutable instruments veils in this situation. Very similar to the quad VCA from IntelliGel. Might be some slight differences in the overall design, but we have here a quad VCA, and the channels kind of descend down to this output. This is kind of the mix output. So we could use this again as a mixer, but and there's nothing wrong with that. But um, let's talk about what just one of these channels is doing to begin with. Okay, so we have a level control, right? We have a curve control. This could potentially alter the loudness of the VCA, the perceived loudness of the VCA. We're going to keep it on the linear side for now. We'll talk about the different types of linear versus exponential versus potentially logarithmic VCAs. Each one is slightly different in terms of the uh, intensity, the speed, the that's really kind of the wrong words. The slope, the shape of how the volume will change or the signal intensity will change. And I think we use exponential for audio and linear for CV. But I might need to kind of review all that. Okay, so let's take a signal and we'll send it into one channel of our VCA. I'm just going to take a signal out of maths channel 1, and we're going to send it to the input here. And we're going to send the output of that same channel down and around to our scope. And notice we see nothing on the scope. And we're going to see nothing on the scope. Someone has the Bifaco Hex Mix VCA, another great VCA, another tool you can use as a mixer. So the mixing side of this, I'd say, is maybe more approachable mentally as a normal signal mixer, right? An audio mixer, just like our Mackie and any other kind of mixer that you might have. This can act in that form, right? But a mixer generally doesn't have activatable VCAs. Okay, so we have the input and the output going here, but there's still a CV input below the input, the audio input signal, or call it the signal input. This input down here at the bottom, you can see connects over to this knob via the little dotted line. Okay, this is telling us that this input will control this knob. Now let's look at what happens when we put this maths channel into a LFO type of a shape, and we raise this signal. Important to consider that maths is generating a unipolar signal. Okay, it's rising above 0 and coming back to 0 volts. In fact, we can, not stop, we can change the amount of time so that we can actually see that shape here on the oscilloscope. If you are a software person, if you're on Ableton, you can download free Max for Live oscilloscopes. This will help you visualize at least your signal coming out of your synthesizers, things like this. But with this oscilloscope, we can visualize a rising and falling signal, right? It doesn't have to be at audio rates as probably our Ableton Max for Live oscilloscopes would need that. But a very useful tool to be able to visualize what is actually coming out of your synthesizer. This plus a frequency spectrum analyzer, super useful. Okay, so shout out to everybody who came into the chat room a minute ago. and onto the video. Glad to have you with us. We're just getting into VCAs. Okay, so hey, I have now got a signal coming from maths into our VCA and then back out over here so that we can visualize that signal through the data. Okay, and we can see there's a rising and falling signal. And as I turn the VCA level back down, you can see that signal shrinking back down itself. So as we increase this again, we start to see the signal gain amplitude. It's going higher and higher. 0 volts is that middle point right there. You see that little flag. It's indicating that middle point is 0 volts, and this signal is rising and falling repeatedly, like an LFO, a unipolar LFO, up to now 8 volts. Okay, we maybe are going to change this to each one of these boxes these kind of chunky boxes here are representative of 2 volts right now. Let's switch it to 5 volts. So now this is still going up about 7.5, 8 volts. And as we keep increasing the attenuated level here, look at that. We can actually increase the gain of this VCA to the point where at around 10 volts, it starts to flatten out. Now, in theory, maths might still be going up another 2 or 5 volts, but here we're seeing that the VCA has a limit of around 10 volts. As we hit that the top of that second box, right? Each of these little boxes is plus 5 volts, and we start to see the edge there, right? So we can actually push that signal to the point where it's actually kind of distorting in a sense. It's not an audio signal to distort at this point, but if we sped this thing up to be an audio rate oscillator, we can do that by routing this out here. We'll route this into the mixer. Let's see if we can hear it. Let's actually speed this up first. There it is. Please excuse any weird glitchy clicking here. And now maybe we zoom back out in time a little bit so we can see the wave shapes. Okay, there we go. We can see that rising and falling signal now. Hopefully you guys can hear that. Let me know if that's too quiet. Looks like it's getting pretty loud, so I'm going to watch the levels. But you can see we're actually clipping the signal. I think this Veils has like +6 gain. So we're actually increasing the gain of that signal. It's limited and hitting a peak, a threshold of 10 volts, and then it flattens out. We start to hear some distortion on that thing, right? And if we reduce the VCA down, that signal goes all the way away. Right? This is kind of what we use a VCA for in the most basic sense. We're using this VCA to create volume change to our signal, right? Now, this carries through no matter what kind of signal we're using, whether it's a low frequency signal, a audio rate frequency signal, as we see here. We did a low frequency signal a moment ago, or even a direct current or fluctuating current function in the form of an envelope or something like this. All of these things can be controlled. The intensity of these elements, the depth of their control can be attenuated by a VCA. Okay. Now, we've learned already that we might need to actually be careful and not turn our VCA up past a certain point, or else our wave shape might uh, uh, start to change. Okay, great question from Tom in the chat. Can you explain the difference between linear and exponential response on the VCA? So this has to do with how fast, if we send in a rising signal to bring this knob up, right? Right. Let's say we want to control that. Uh, the difference between a linear, exponential, or logarithmic VCA would be that if we sent a signal in to control the level, the amplitude of our of this current VCA in use, the let's say we had a linear signal that goes from 0 to 5 volts over the course of a second. Okay, a linear signal or linear VCA will maintain, in theory, the shape of that rise over 1 second. Uh, if we use an exponential VCA, that linear control will create a faster increase in the level, creating something that looks and feels a little bit more like a hump at the front end of the signal. Now, maybe I'm mistaking linear for uh, exponential. Effectively, it's going to gain in signal faster than the linear version will. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong, chat room. Logarithmic will take longer to slope upwards in volume by comparison. Now, they'll all reach full volume at 1 second, but the slope at which that volume change occurs, by which that volume change occurs, will feel different. So, for instance, maybe we can try this out. Let's try getting this signal passing through here again. And maybe we'll use the other channel on maths to modulate this signal. And we can try then the exponential input. Effectively, this simply controls the the shape of the volume change, if we want to think about it that way. Give us some input, Ed. I like your uh, I like your commentary. Let's get some of that. Okay, so here we go. We're going to create a ramp up and now I think in this particular VCA, as we go further towards the other side, we start to get towards the exponential side. We also start to increase the gain a little bit. You hear how it's kind of got a reverse sounding shape to it. And you can kind of see there's like this little slope indicator that's showing something a little bit more curved inwards than the linear input. You hear how when this rise begins, it starts to, in linear mode, it brings the volume up a pretty noticeable amount and continues bringing it all the way up until it resets, until it starts again, right? The exponential side, though, stays quieter for longer. And in the last tiny bit of time, still the same amount of time in that rise, but the shape has changed. Now we're getting more of a sloping up, a rounded slope up, as opposed to the linear, which gives us a little bit more smooth change, right? So um, I would guess that yes, there's a little bit more to this. For instance, the gain change that we hear when we start turning this further towards the exponential side. There's a little. Now, this might purely be the. Let's see. Is linear the true signal envelope? The envelope that I'm using to create that ramp is linear, right? So linear envelope or ramp shape and linear signal input gives us that very kind of smooth, consistent rise, right? Yeah, the IntelliGel has a boost switch on each one of the channels. The Veils does not have that. So if we're playing around with this and tinkering with it live, we might need to be cognizant of the fact that this thing might boost the signal as we go further towards the exponential side. All right. But we're talking about sometimes subtle differences. If we were doing this much faster, uh, yeah, pretty noticeable difference from one side to the other. But we have that kind of that character to the exponential mode where we get this kind of almost. It almost feels like the sound is happening in reverse. It almost feels like we're kind of flinging into that full signal at the last second and then it goes away right away. So there's a different character to this, right? Now, we could also affect the linear slash exponential slash logarithmic shape on the envelope potentially. So these things come together. They do. They can affect each other depending on which one you have set up on the one side versus the other side. You might counteract the other. So it's worth experimenting and playing with these things. But um, we can see now there's a little bit of change happening. We have a signal that's going to be coming through consistently when we unplug this CV input. When we plug something into it, the signal goes away and it waits for a signal coming into this input to allow the actual signal to pass through. Astrofish, what's up? Um, the linear is the VCA itself and how it handles its incoming CV signal. In this case, from an envelope. The signal input is still just taking a triangle type of wave from the one cycling channel on maths. So yeah, we have two inputs technically on every VCA, right? The signal input and the CV input to control the intensity, the level, the amplitude of that channel. So let's think about a very simple example of when we might want to use a VCA for something other than volume control, right? The volume control portion is almost implied. It's something that we are going to need on almost every synthesizer patch we build. And that's why on most plugins, on most hardware synthesizers, the VCA is already connected. There's an envelope already kind of dedicated to that volume change function, but we have other envelopes. We have other things we want to assign our envelopes to. So, and LFOs for that matter. So let's think about an example of when we might want to use an LFO, but control its intensity, control the amplitude of that LFO. What might be a good example of that? And I would say one perfect example would be vibrato. right? If we want to create a sense of very subtle pitch change that gives us the effect of the classic vibrato quality in live performance and instrument performance. Um, let's see, the IntelliGel also have a CV in offset knob, and the lights turn green red. Yeah, we have that in the veils as well. These have indicating lights. We do not have a CV offset. I guess we do actually. No, we don't. We don't really have a CV offset. This is basically going to set the maximum level of the incoming signal, and then the CV manipulation of that is going to come up to that position. So this is kind of setting our maximum, and then this input CV signal should hit around where this is set. So we can do, in a sense, level control right here on the mixable VCA. This kind of goes back to the mixer use of these things, right? We might not want to use offset on the CV or the VCA if we want to use it as a standard mixer, but as a CV mixer, as a CV control device, it might be interesting. Okay, so we're going to take now. We've got our signal coming in here, showing us our. Let's actually do this. Turn this down. Okay, so there's our triangle wave. Now we're going to take another cycling signal here. We're going to have to time it in a second here. That should be around okay. Okay, now we're going to create a sense of vibrato. We're going to turn this up a little bit. Okay, and then we're going to patch this VCA right into, or sorry, not the VCA, the looping channel from maths, right into the both input on the other channel of maths, the one that we're getting the triangle wave from. Extreme. That's pretty extreme, right? You guys can hear that, right? Let me know if you cannot hear the modular. Hopefully you can. But when would we use vibrato like that? Probably never. I mean, we're kind of getting close to almost a go fast enough FM type of modulation, right? But that's really extreme for vibrato. Vibrato is supposed to be like a semitone at most, maybe a fraction of that in pitch change. So this isn't really giving us the amount of pitch change we want. It's giving us an extreme amount. This is kind of going back to that point I made earlier about when we assign modulation inside of our plugins, we might rarely actually assign that modulation to turn that knob from its absolute extremes. That's kind of what we're doing right now. We're telling this channel on maths to go to really high frequencies and really low frequencies really fast. And we might only want it to go across a semitone rather than as high as it can go and as low as it can go. So to handle this, we're going to send a signal into our VCA, right? And then we're going to take that signal out of the VCA. It's going into channel 2 now on our VCA. And we're going to come out of the VCA. We'll do this with a smaller cable here. Some of these teeny tiny cables. We're going to go out of that channel into that same pitch control input. Now when we dial down our VCA channel, and now we might dial in our LFO speed. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, it doesn't do offset besides the boost on the IntelliGel Quad VCA. That seemed like it might be an odd thing for a VCA to do, but, you know. Oh, we're getting there, Amara Music. Thank you for joining us, by the way. Amara asks, any thoughts on pros or cons of using cascaded VCAs as mixers versus traditional utility mixers? Now, if we're using these for audio signal, which I do, I use this, or I have anyway. I've used this VCA essentially as a 4-channel mixer. Uh, totally fine. Don't even have to use it for VCA purposes, but it has that added function. Maybe a utility mixer won't have CV inputs. That's one generally big difference. Now it depends on which mixer you're using. If you're using the WMD performance mixer, every channel can be a VCA. Every channel can be modulated by a CV signal. I think every channel, almost every channel. But yeah, nothing wrong with using it as a submixer. Using your 16N fader bank, hell yeah, I love that thing. Reminds me of my old Dope Fur pocket fader, which I also still use. A 16-channel MIDI controller. The 16N fader bank though is 16 channels of DC offset. So really fun device to play and use there. All right. Well, what have we done here? We've taken one channel and we've turned it into on the maths anyway, we've turned it into an audio rate oscillator. And then we took another channel, channel 4, we put it in a cycle as well. We sped up that rate a little bit, so that it's still an LFO. It's probably going 5-8 times a second, right? Yeah, offset control not common on VCAs, definitely. We have a cat playing underneath me. That's not for you. The cat's trying to take my chair wheels. Nice try, Mogi. This is what the cat was trying to walk away with. It's one of the wheels from my desk chair. It popped off, and there's nothing. It's like when it gets on the rug, it's like a hockey puck for cats. So I had to take it away. Okay, so cat crisis averted. Okay, so let's continue here. We've got channel 1 up here, has effectively an oscillator coming in. Channel 2 has an LFO routed in there. And when that channel 2 is turned all the way down, we hear no effect of that LFO on the pitch. But as we turn it up, so that VCA helps us to maintain a consistent amount of signal, right? A consistent amplitude that's controllable of modulation, right? That is controlling the pitch on our vibrato. So this is maybe one of the simplest examples that I could think of, vibrato, where if it's set to go all the way, if it's set to do pitch manipulation 100% of the way, sounds more like this. Not very musical, right? But when attenuated, when only a tiny bit is allowed through, we get this complicated, interesting, it does sound kind of like a theremin sound, partially because usually when the theremin player is controlling pitch, they're trying to create a real instrument-like feeling by doing vibrato by hand, right? Just by kind of like very slightly moving their hand near the antenna, they create a sense of vibrato. Maybe they do it with the other antenna, they create a sense of tremolo. It's that motion that creates a little bit of the more realistic qualities of an instrument, right? It's just like a violinist very subtly moving their finger back and forth as they hold a note on the fingerboard. It's creating a sense of expression. And that's really what this is all about. It's how do we not just create expression, but control it so it sounds expressive and not insane, right? Vibrato like this might be useful for getting people's attention, right? Might be useful for making sure people get the hell out of the way when the police car or the fire truck are on their way, but maybe not so pleasant as a lead instrument, not something that you might want to listen to as the main element in a track. Now, I'm not making any judgments there. If you want to use sirens as an element in your, or the main element in your track, by all means do it. It's worked for countless people. Worked for Major Lazer. They've got tons of tracks with what sound like sirens cut up as the lead elements. So this isn't a, you know, I'm not making a value judgment here, but we're talking about the ability to dial in subtlety in the expression, right? That subtlety, that limitation, that control is what makes interesting, expressive, emotive sounds. So we need those VCAs. And if you've ever done this in software, like we were talking about earlier, and you just assign an LFO over there and it just whoosh, controls every, it sends the pitch in this case, or whatever control you're trying to manipulate, the FM amount or something like this, from 0 to 100%, not the most musical or controlled or listenable results. So this is, kind of getting back to that question of how do I dial it in? How do I get there to the sound that I want, as opposed to this cockamamie insanity that's happening inside of the patch right now. So um, now maths, if you have maths, can act as a VCA. It's got these controls, these offsets in the middle that can, or attenuators or inverters, right? That's that allows us to do a lot of manipulation of signal generating from maths alone, right? But let's reconfigure this a little bit. Let's think about other ways to employ a VCA. I think Ed is making a great point here, modulating modulations, right? Yesterday, or not, 2 days ago on Saturday, I'm sorry, I cannot remember who asked this, but they were asking about CV mixing, right? And why would we do it to begin with, right? This is, if you're from the software world, this is like assigning multiple modulators to one control, right? Let's say we assign one LFO that's going at a certain speed and maybe a certain shape, another LFO that's going at another independent speed, another shape, and we map both of those to one control, like frequency or filter cutoff. We'll we'll get a combination of those things as one modulator goes into the positive range. It's going to, they're both going to kind of add and subtract from each other and create a much more complex shape. So let's think about what that might look like. We're going to turn this other modulation source on. That way we can visualize what's happening. Okay, so um, we're going to leave our volume control right there. Okay, or our signal is still going to go to input one. We're going to take the output of this other looping channel. We're going to send it to channel 2 over here on our oscilloscope. It's going a little bit crazy, so we will, let's see, where do we change this? Nope, on, and then there we go. So maybe we can see that. The green line is still our audio rate oscillator. The blue line going slower. You can kind of see that. And maybe we'll just turn off our audio visualizer for a minute. Okay, so we've got a signal coming out from, actually here, let's take the bottom output signal. This is going to add the leftover channels. Any output that doesn't have a cable connected to it, like our first one here, they're all going to add in down here to our bottom output. I believe the IntelliGel works the same way. Triple modulation will please your brain. Great idea. VM Sky, that's right. I think you were asking about CV mixing, right? So now we're getting into that. Now we're going to CV mix. Now we need another signal, another CV signal somewhere here. So I'm going to click on my other case, and we're going to route another signal down here. Let's see. Let's try a sequence, right? We kind of toyed around with that idea the other day. So what if we route in here to this third input a sequencer signal from Renee? Okay, and I'm just going to clock Renee up above with Tempe. Sorry you guys can't see this, but you have to trust me. And my Renee doesn't want to work. Let's try. Let's see here. X. Okay. All right, well, that's frustrating. Let's try something else. Let's try brains. Okay, there we go. All right, and I'm going to take a signal out of brains instead of the Renee for some reason. Okay, so now we're sending a signal from a sequencer into the input, okay? And they're all going to mix in and come out of the output. So let's dial in a little sequence. It's just going to be a rising sequence, and this is going to add to what's coming in. Let's see. Random question. How far in your modular journey did you get the data module? Way too late. I'll tell you that much. The data has been a great help. If you need a good excuse to get one, it acts as a quad oscillator. If you have time, if there's times when you don't need an oscilloscope, it can act as a quad oscillator. It can act as a quad clock generator, and it can dial into very precise BPM tempi. So that's a really nice thing. You can actually dial it into, 128.2 or something like this, and I don't know if you want to use it for beat matching, but I suppose you could. Okay, so now we have a signal. You can see that rising and falling signal there, moving nice and slow across the view. Now what happens, and maybe I'll slow down our sequence up here so we can really see this coming through. What happens when we increase the level here on input 3, which is receiving a 4-step slow sequence, DC signal, right? Steps, where it's actually moving, in fact, let's just visualize that for a second. I'll turn this one off, and then boom, boom. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so we bring in this other signal. Now we do at a certain point, because we're adding these things together, we do reach that 10-volt peak, right? All right, now what does this all sound like? Well, I mean, it sounds like nothing basically because because it's just modulation signals. But what will it sound like when we have it modulate something that we can identify, like frequency, right? Let's plug the output of this into the frequency input on. And maybe we shrink down our sequence, just our sequence. This is an unquantized sequence, mind you. Right, so we have a 4-step sequence in pitches. And when we're just using that sequence, look at that. We have an attenuator. Still sounds a little out of tune because, again, it's not quantized. It's not in tune. This is not meant to necessarily be a performable sequence, especially because we're using maths as our oscillator right now, which does not really track with 1 volt per octave pitch modulation. Even if we did have a quantized signal, our oscillator right now isn't really designed to respond to a 1 volt per octave signal. It's one of the fun things about maths as an oscillator, frankly, especially if you're into techno or more of the microtonal or atonal type of stuff. This might be a useful application of maths. But okay, so one signal has this sequence. The other signal is our vibrato. Add them together. Oh, how about that? Speed up that clock a little bit. Okay, what have we done? We've mixed together a musical sequence of notes, of CV direct currents that are changing our pitch of our oscillator, right? This is like if we sent a step sequencer, a random stepped voltage generator, something like that. If we're thinking in the software world, we might not need to do all of this stuff to create a sense of vibrato as the pitch changes, right? The pitch on our synthesizer, our plugins, and things like this are simply responding to our MIDI notes. So that, all we really need to do on a synthesizer in our plugin, in our a plugin format, would be to create the vibrato using an LFO, a minimally modulating LFO, just a teeny bit, right? And then we use our normal pitch sequence, our MIDI note sequence, right? But in modular, we don't get that. We don't have the ease of use necessarily like that. So this is where CV mixing starts to come in and become very interesting and fun and musical. And this is also where we start bumping into that technique that we talked about 2 days ago when VM asked this question. The one that I mentioned was a technique that I recall was in a video by the modular techno artist Stevio, Stevio. Wait, sorry, Steevio. Stevio. It's two E's. Steve EO, not Stevia. We're not talking gross sweeteners. Sorry, I don't like stevia. We're talking Stevio, the producer, the techno uh, luminary. This guy used to be on all of the modular channels from 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, but I don't know what Stevio is doing these days. But this is one technique that Stevio shared for his live performance technique to create evolving, interesting, and new sequences. So to get there, let's take out our LFO. Okay, and this might fuck me up now because I got to get the Renee working. Let's try it out. Let's see if I can get Renee going too. So we're going to take that 4-step sequence that's already going in there, and we are going to send another sequence back into that same input that we were using a moment ago. Let's see if I can get that sequence working, because I don't know what is going on with Renee right now. I think I'm not hooking it up right. I think I've not used Renee in long enough that it's just a brain fart, but we're going to get it going. Yeah, Stevio. If you guys don't know Stevio, you should know Stevio. He is a very cool dude. Now, where am I going to get another sequence? Okay, let's try this. Now, we're going to want to send the same clock signal to these sequencers so that they're going in time together. Okay, so I'm going to take one clock, one sequence. This is going to be a 3-step sequence, and we're going to, let's see here. I'm going to mult the clock that we send it. We're going to send that to control our first sequence. Okay, there's that one going now. Oh, wrong output. Okay, so now I have a 3-step sequence on one of my sequences. Oh, wait. Stevio has his own festival? Oh, Stevio is why I use precision adders in most patches. The precision adder is a Doepfer module. That's exactly how this technique was originally proposed by Stevio. He swears by those precision adders, and the reason they're precision adders is because you can add together signals in, I believe, even voltage amounts, so that you get very precise amounts of combined signals. Okay, so I need to get a long cable here to go over to my other sequencer. There we go. Now we got it working. Okay, so we got one sequence coming in here. Let's listen to that. Okay, and I'm going to take another sequence. I'm going to turn this other channel all the way down. Take another sequence. This is a 5-step sequence. I'm going to route it to the input. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? 3-step sequence. Here's our 5-step sequence. 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, I'm clocking this from the Woggle Bugs. That might be... maybe my tempi is screwy. I'm doing something wrong, that's for sure. Okay, whatever. We're going to use the Woggle So excuse any slightly weird timing because this is kind of the nature of the Wogglebug clock, at least when it's not clocked from another source. Okay, so we've got a 5-step and a 3-step. Now, what happens when we add these together? What's 5 times 3? There it restarts. Let's make this 3 steps and 4 steps. So every 12 steps, we should hear this kind of repeat. Let's speed this up a little bit. And if you subdivide this, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 0, 2, 2, 0, 1. I can't count that fast, but 3 steps, 4 steps. Add them together, and we get 3-step sequence times a 4-step sequence. As the steps add together, right, we start to not perceive them as being separate 4 and 3-step sequences. We start to perceive them as being a longer sequence, right? We have to wait until the 3-step plays 4 times, and until the 4-step plays 3 times, right? So this is kind of what we're getting at here, is that we can create these evolving sequences by simply changing very slight things on one of these 2 sequencers, like the length of the sequence or a pitch value on one of the DC currents for the sequence. Whoa. Now we have 4 and 5 steps. And simply by changing the amplitude on the VCA channels, right? We're not really doing any gate patching right now. If we were to do that, we could make this even more interesting, because we don't have to hear every one of those 20 notes. We could hear it, every other one, and all of a sudden it's going to feel like a 10-step sequence, or every 3 of them, and all of a sudden it's going to feel like a 60-step sequence, but with rests in between. There's a lot of ways that we can take this out now, right? So this is where having VCAs becomes really interesting. You could use a precision adder, right? But if we're making techno, I think, in Stevio's case, there's a little bit of a melodic flavor to some of the things that he creates. But, what if we're performing frequency modulation here some of the time, right? What if we're performing, basically making tonal character out of our oscillator section that's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more interesting than just a tone triangle type of wave coming out of maths. If we're doing some frequency modulation, then we might already be getting some nice complicated tonalities from these things. So the addition of the ability to create some complicated patterns with very tiny means, right? Like very small pieces are being added together through this thing to make something a lot more interesting. So, um, just to mention, maths kind of has this already going on. We could do all of this for the most part inside of maths, right? We could send these CV signals instead of into the VCA, we could send them into the input channels on channels 2 and 3 on maths, right? And then maybe we could use the output on maths. We can visualize that. The sum output we're going to use. Okay, I think did we turn that off? What the heck? Oh, okay, so it's not showing like anything much is happening there right now because we need to now turn up the attenuverters on channels 2 and 3 on maths. And the great thing about this is that we can invert them. This is something we can't do on a VCA, and something that would make an attenuverter maybe a very useful thing in this case. This is what we have here with these channels. So if we turn one of these up, let's actually turn the volume up. Whoa. Sorry if that's like deathly loud. Fill me in if it is. We can turn them both to the positive side. Wambra, what up? Let's make it a 3 and 4 or 3 and 2 step sequence real quick. One thing is it's kind of hard to zero out these attenuverters. There's no notch in the middle, so that makes it a little bit harder to return them all back to zero. Thanks, Wambra. Appreciate it. Even with a teeny little bit of CV coming from that other channel, it sounds like a 6-step sequence, right? Maybe we'll turn this oscillator up in pitch a little bit. So the first sequence of 2 notes is being negatively inverted, right? So it's going down and it's subtracting from the channel 3 sequence. That's why we get these nice weird low notes. And guess what? We could also add in channel 4. We'd want to turn it off if we weren't using it. Maths, yes, exactly the same. Even like the MK1 version of Maths, I believe, is the exact same, with the slight difference of the panel imagery. So if we turn on our looping LFO over here on channel 4, And now this thing is slowly rising and falling, and it's taking the whole sequence up and down with it. Turn off the looping. We can even leave it active with the attenuverter, and then just turn it on every once in a while. Right? No reason we couldn't turn on and off that cycling via a gate. You know, we send the output from the mix output to a quantizer. If we want to get it all sounding like it's, you know, in key in a chromatic scale, or not just chromatic scale, right? We can make a much more musical scale. Uh, Maths 2013 was improved with 10 volts on out 2 for 1. Great point. Yeah, output 2 or channel 2 gives us a range of plus 10 to not, minus 10, I think, volts. Channel 3 is plus 5 to minus 5, though that changes if we send a signal in. Those are just the values for the DC offset if there's no input to that channel. This then gives plus 10, minus 10 uh, direct current voltage out of the maths, out of the sum output. The channel 3 is plus minus 5, I believe. So, yeah, it's a good point, Ed. I don't know a lot of the specifics about the original maths because I don't have one, though I'm certainly want one. It's a nice little difference there. Yeah. Wow. CV mixing. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense because the whole idea here is to make some sense. Uh, any other examples you guys would like to see? The 10 volt is nice. We got these nice, nice high amplitude functions that come out of maths as well. These rising and falling functions, which of course can be either envelopes or, if cycled, LFOs. And that, I mean, we could spend another day on maths or many days on maths. Happy to do that. We used to have the many faces of make noise maths class that we ran for a long time. Our good friend Bradley up in Seattle did a number of what's the word I'm looking for? Workshops at Patchworks up there, using some of our material. So if you guys are up in the Seattle area, you probably know Bradley. If you don't, you should know him. He runs or doesn't run, but he organizes the Seattle area modular on the spot, amongst many other things. He did the Velocity Festival last fall. Amazing festival that he and Patchworks put on together, and yeah, shit. Questions, comments? Anybody download the Minimoog app? I tried it on Kinkus's recommendation. It's very cool. And being able to hook up MPE to the Minimoog is kind of a special thing, I feel like. Now we're going to come back over here. And I'm only halfway on my chair because there's a cat here. Why don't you come up here? Why don't you come say hello? That's a good kitty. That's a good kitty. So, shit. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any patches we should try? Any thoughts on VCAs? Questions? Concerns? Complaints? Was this a useful application of your time? Um, I hope it was. I think we're gonna maybe cut it off here shortly. Um, Great point, Ed. Headroom and gain staging is important. If we let's see, tried it. MIDI worked poorly. MIDI in what, Tracy? Tracy, what's up, by the way? Thanks again for coming in here. Brian, thanks for coming in. Um, Sorry to tempt you with precision adders and VCAs. Um, Very curious what MIDI worked poorly for you, Tracy. Francisco, what up, dude? Hope everything is cool up there in the icy north. I'm trying to get this stand to actually stand up. That should do it. Yeah. Well, I'm going to do my damnedest this week and in the following weeks to try and not say as much. There we go and do it. This is like Trump giving a antivirus chat. The MIDI worked poorly on the Model D app. Interesting. I did not even get around to trying the MIDI, though I really want to try it with MPE. I wonder if that is something in the app or the MIDI interface. I don't know. I haven't spent enough time with MIDI on iOS to really know what works. But anyway, well, I put a poll up on our YouTube channel, and if you guys want to see any of the things that I mentioned in that poll this week in our continuing daily noontime office hours, our spring break lessons, our spring break tutorials, um, let me know. Put that in the chat. Put it in the comments on our poll on our YouTube channel. I'll just. I don't blame you for that, Wambra. I feel your pain. So what do I need to tell you? Oh, okay. Couple of things before we go. We're gonna wrap it up in just a moment. We're gonna be back here tomorrow at noon, doing this all over again. Please come through. Please join us. I love seeing you guys out here, chatting with you guys, talking with you guys. If you have any suggestions, complaints, whatever you want to register with us, please shoot it at me. You could send me an email. You could tweet at me. I'm at Computo or at V Control Lab. Oh, no, you missed it, Nathan. Well, you can watch back, and we will be back here tomorrow at noon. Sorry that you came in late, but glad to have you while we have you. Okay, so just some housekeeping. Every day at noon, except for Sundays. Tomorrow, we're probably going to go more angles and cameras. Okay, I'll try. Tomorrow, we're going to go with, well, I'll figure it out tomorrow. We're going to get something going tomorrow. Where is that poll, please? Oh, okay. The poll is POLL poll, it's not a POLE poll, but it should. You might have to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and it should come up on your. I think it's under the community page actually on our YouTube channel. Let me see if I can bring it up here. I don't know how this will work while we're live streaming, but we're gonna try it. It's working. It's just working slow. Okay, let's go to the channel. Yeah, I think if you go to the Voltage Control Lab channel and go to the community page, yes, that is where the poll sits. Looks like maybe tomorrow we'll do plates, mutable instruments plates. And so those are just a couple of ideas out of the long ass list of stuff that I have to possibly talk about in the coming weeks. But please, by all means, add some comments in there if you have other things that you'd like to see. That way I can register it and know where all these things are going to go. Subscribe to the channel, then you'll get announcements whenever the live stream starts. You can hit that little bell icon on the subscribe button. That'll get you even closer. You guys are cracking me up right now. Um, and please, if you can, share what we're doing with any friends who you think will actually care about this. I don't necessarily think that your friends who are unrelated to music and sound design will be that thrilled by it, but some of us have nothing better to do, like me. So if you want to help us out, one way that you could help us out will be get the word out about the show and direct people back to some of these videos. That we would extremely appreciate that because we want to try to get this out to as many people who might need the distraction as there might be. Other ways that you can support us, if you want to check out Voltage Control Lab all over the internet. We're on Instagram at Voltage Control Lab. We're on Twitter at V Control Lab because they don't. You have to fit it into 15 letters or something like that. Um, you can find my music and my music channel at Computo pretty much everywhere. IamComputo.com. COMPUTO, like computer, but Computo. And Victor back here has been doing mastering, mixing and mastering. So if you guys need any mixing and mastering, hit us up. I'll link you back to Victor. Do you have a website for that yet, or
No, working on
email?
that. Email, yeah, you could use bangingbeats@yahoo.com.
Banging Beats with a G at the end of Banging Beats at yahoo.com if you want to hit up Victor for some mixing and mastering. He's not going anywhere. He's just mastering tracks back there. So, uh, Wambra, tomorrow at noon Pacific Standard Time. Always at noon Pacific Standard Time. And tomorrow, speak, Victor, please. Ed asked.
Say it again.
Ed asked you to speak.
Hey, Ed, what's going on? Sorry, buddy.
It's still sleepy time a little bit here. So don't mistake my exuberance for synthesizers as me being awake because I'm not.
I didn't get my coffee, so
Oh, okay. Well,
now
yeah,
you know.
we're gonna have to go fix that right now. So, all right, my friends. Well, thank you immensely for coming and joining us, and I wish you all the absolute best. And can't thank you enough for coming in and hanging out with us. Hope to see you guys tomorrow, noon noon every day this week, except and every week until spring break ends inexplicably whenever it ends. Then we will reassess our schedule. But until then, we're going to do this every day except for Sundays, and can't wait to see you guys again. Ed Sweeney, thank you very much. Ed Random, thank you for your compliments. Victor, Ed says you have a nice voice.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it.
Okay, you guys, really appreciate your hanging out with us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Take care.
Have a good one.